The sun dipped low over the sprawling plains of Nika, an ancient African village nestled between golden grasslands and towering baobab trees. The evening sky was painted in deep shades of orange and crimson, a breathtaking sight that marked the transition from day to night. In the heart of this village, where the drumbeats of tradition echoed through the air, the people lived by unshakable beliefs in fate and the unseen hands of destiny. To them, every event, every twist of life's path, was woven by the spirits of the ancestors, guiding mortals toward their ultimate purpose. Among the villagers was a young girl named Abeni, whose very name meant, "We asked for her, and she came," in the language of her people. She was a striking beauty, her deep brown skin glowing like polished mahogany under the sun, and her large, expressive eyes holding the depth of the river that ran along the village's border. Yet it was not her beauty that made her special, it was the kindness in her heart, the warmth in her smile, and the wisdom she carried despite her youth. Abeni was beloved by the elders, who often spoke of her gentleness and generosity. She was the one who helped the old women fetch water when their backs ached, the one who cared for orphaned animals, and the one who listened patiently to the griots, the storytellers, absorbing the lessons hidden in ancient tales. But not everyone in the village adored her. In the shadows of admiration, envy took root. Her two older sisters, Zuba and Kaya, watched her with eyes filled with resentment. While Abeni was praised, they were overlooked. While she was showered with affection, they felt as though they were cast aside. The jealousy between siblings was not uncommon, but in the case of Zuba and Kaya, it burned with an intensity that neither of them could control. They saw Abeni not as a sister but as an obstacle, someone who stood in the way of their own recognition. The more love Abeni received, the more their bitterness grew, like weeds choking out a flourishing garden. Yet Abeni, ever trusting, never saw the darkness creeping in. She believed in the goodness of her sisters, blind to the poison that festered in their hearts. But fate had a way of revealing the hidden truths of the world, often in the most unexpected ways. In African folklore, destiny was not something one could outrun. It was like the river, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always flowing toward its chosen course. The ancestors whispered their guidance in the wind, and even the smallest actions could set great events in motion. Abeni's fate had already been decided long before she ever took her first breath. Little did Abeni know, the betrayal of her sisters would lead her to a destiny greater than she ever imagined. The path ahead would be filled with pain, loss, and trials, but it would also be the key to uncovering the truth of who she truly was. The spirits had spoken. Her journey was about to begin. Life in the village of Nika was simple yet vibrant, filled with the rhythmic sounds of nature, laughter, and the wisdom of generations past. The sun always rose with a golden warmth, casting light upon the fields where farmers tilled the land, the riverbanks where women gathered to wash clothes, and the market where traders displayed their finest wares. It was a place where community meant everything, where traditions were upheld with reverence, and where fate was woven into the fabric of daily life. Among the villagers, Abeni was a name spoken with admiration. From the time she was a small girl, she carried a light within her, an aura of kindness, intelligence, and grace. She was known for her gentle nature, always eager to help others, whether it was gathering firewood for an elderly widow, soothing a crying child, or offering to carry water for those too weary to do so themselves. Her heart was as vast as the open sky, and her generosity knew no limits. Abeni also possessed a beauty that was undeniable. Her dark skin shimmered under the sun like polished ebony, her deep-set eyes held the wisdom of the ancestors, and her long, thick braids cascaded down her back like rivers flowing toward the earth. But more than her outward appearance, it was the beauty of her spirit that drew people toward her. She spoke with a softness that commanded attention, and when she laughed, it was like the melody of the village flute, light, free, and full of life. The elders of Nika often spoke highly of her, praising her respect for traditions and her deep curiosity about the ways of the ancestors. She would sit for hours with the village griots, listening to stories of warriors and queens, of trickster spirits and wise animals, of love and loss. Unlike other children who grew impatient, Abeni absorbed these lessons like the earth drinking in the rain, eager to learn, to understand. It was said that she carried an old soul within her, a spirit wise beyond her years. But where there was light there was also shadow. Zuba and Kaya, Abeni's older sisters, watched her with simmering resentment. They had always felt overlooked, cast aside in favor of their younger sibling. While Abeni received praise they felt invisible. While she was showered with affection, they felt only the weight of expectation. Their mother, though loving, had a clear favorite, and it was not them. Their mother, Mama Nia, had long since come to rely on Abeni for comfort. "Abeni, my jewel," she would say, cupping the girl's face in her hands, "you are the light of my heart." These words, though meant with love, only deepened the bitterness in Zuba and Kaya. To them, Abeni was not a sister but a rival. The tension between them grew over the years, subtle at first, a dismissive glance, a forced smile, a task given to Abeni with just a little more cruelty than necessary. But as time passed, their envy twisted into something darker. One fateful day, the festival of New Harvest was announced, a time of great celebration in Nika. The festival was an opportunity for the entire village to gather, to give thanks to the spirits for the year's bounty, and to honor those who had brought the most joy and prosperity to the community. As the drums echoed through the village, excitement filled the air. Abeni, as always, participated with enthusiasm. She danced gracefully in the village square, her feet moving with the precision of a bird gliding through the sky. Her voice rang clear in the ceremonial songs, her laughter harmonizing with the beating drums. She assisted the elders in preparing the sacred offerings, ensuring every detail was perfect. It was no surprise when, at the height of the festival, the chief elder stood before the gathered villagers and declared, "This year the honor of the blessed soul goes to Abeni." The title was a great one, given to the person who had shown the most kindness, selflessness, and dedication to the village. The crowd erupted in cheers. The villagers clapped, the children danced around Abeni, and Mama Nia beamed with pride. A woven sash of the finest blue and gold was draped over Abeni's shoulders, a symbol of the village's love and admiration. But in the shadows, Zuba and Kaya seethed. Their fingers clenched into fists, their nails digging into their palms. They had been ignored once again, pushed into the background as Abeni stood in the light. The bitterness that had been simmering in their hearts boiled over into something dangerous. That night, as the festival fires burned low and the village settled into slumber, Zuba and Kaya made a silent vow. They would no longer stand in Abeni's shadow. They would no longer be second to her. And so, the seeds of betrayal were sown. The night after the festival, while the village lay in peaceful slumber, Zuba and Kaya sat in the dim glow of their hut, their hearts burning with resentment. The laughter and cheers from earlier still rang in their ears, but to them, it was nothing more than a mockery. Abeni had once again stolen the attention, basking in the love of the people while they were forgotten. They had endured years of being cast aside, of living in the shadows of their younger sister. But no more. "We have to get rid of her," Kaya whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling embers of the dying fire. Zuba's eyes gleamed with cold determination. But how? For a long moment they sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Then, as if the spirits had whispered the answer into the night, Kaya's lips curled into a slow smile. "The traitors," she said, her voice barely above a breath. Zuba's head snapped toward her. "The foreign traitors?" Kaya nodded. "Yes. Have you not heard? They come from distant lands, offering beads, cloth, and salt in exchange for young girls. I overheard the elders speaking. They pass through the river trail every few moons, seeking those who can be of use to their masters." Zuba hesitated, the weight of the idea settling upon her. This was no mere act of cruelty, it was a betrayal beyond anything they had done before. But then she thought of Abeni's smile, of the way their mother always spoke of her as if she were a rare jewel, of how they had been invisible for so long. What was one girl's fate compared to their own freedom from her shadow? The plan took root that very night. The following morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the village, the sisters approached Abeni with smiles so sweet they hid the poison beneath. "Sister," Zuba said, taking Abeni's hands in hers, "we need your help." Abeni, ever trusting, looked at them with gentle curiosity. "Of course. What is it?" Kaya stepped forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a great secret. "The village healer has asked us to fetch the rarest of herbs, ones that grow only in the deepest part of the forest. She says they are needed for a powerful medicine." Abeni's face lit up. She had always been eager to help, and this task seemed important. "Then we must go at once," she said, without a moment's hesitation. The journey into the forest was long and winding, the trees growing denser with every step. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, the chirping of birds replaced by an eerie silence. Still, Abeni did not question her sisters. She believed in their words, in their bond. But as they reached a secluded clearing near the river, Abeni suddenly felt a shift in the air. She turned to speak, but before she could, Zuba grabbed her wrist with a grip as cold as iron. "Forgive us, little sister," Kaya murmured. From the shadows, a group of men emerged, their dark eyes glinting with greed. They were not of the village. Their clothes were unfamiliar, their accents thick and heavy. They carried sacks slung over their backs, some filled with goods, others with things Abeni dared not imagine. Fear coiled in Abeni's stomach. She took a step back, but Zuba held her firm. "What is this?" Abeni's voice was barely a whisper, her heart pounding against her ribs. One of the traders, a tall man with scarred arms and a gaze as sharp as a blade, stepped forward. "You bring us a fine one," he said to Zuba and Kaya, tossing a small pouch at their feet. The pouch fell open, revealing beads, brilliant, shimmering beads of blue and red, more beautiful than any the sisters had ever seen. Abeni's breath caught in her throat. "No, no, this is not possible." She turned to her sisters, pleading, searching for some sign that this was a mistake. But their eyes did not hold regret. Only cold satisfaction. "We had no choice," Zuba said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You will understand one day." The trader seized Abeni's arm, his grip firm and unyielding. Panic surged through her as she fought against him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please, Kaya. Zuba. Do not do this." But her sisters had already turned away. Abeni's screams were swallowed by the rustling leaves as she was dragged toward the waiting caravan. The sisters did not look back as the traders led their new captive away. They clutched their beads tightly, feeling their weight in their palms. They had done it. They had finally rid themselves of Abeni. Or so they thought. For fate was watching, and fate did not forget. Abeni's cries echoed through the dense forest, but no one came to her aid. The trees stood silent, indifferent to her suffering, and the river continued its endless course, carrying away her desperate pleas. The hands that held her were rough, unyielding, dragging her forward with no regard for the terror in her wide eyes. She struggled, twisting against the grip of the trader who had claimed her, but it was useless. He was strong, his fingers like iron shackles around her wrist. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice raw with betrayal and fear. "My sisters, this must be a mistake. They would never." But as the caravan moved forward, Abeni knew the truth. Zuba and Kaya had sold her. Her own blood, the sisters she had loved and trusted, had traded her for beads. The realization struck her like a blade to the heart, leaving her breathless. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to sob. Crying would not change what had happened. Crying would not bring her home. The journey was long and merciless. They traveled across raging rivers, the icy waters numbing her bare feet as she waded through under the watchful eyes of her captors. She stumbled over roots and sharp stones, her skin bruised and scraped, but the traders did not care. To them she was not Abeni, beloved daughter, cherished sister, or bright soul of the village. She was merely a possession. The men spoke in hushed voices, their language a mix of dialects, some words foreign, others familiar. Abeni listened closely, her ears sharp even in her despair. She needed to understand her fate, to know where they were taking her. "The chieftain will pay well for this one," one of them murmured, glancing in her direction. "Yes," another agreed, adjusting the spear slung over his back. "She is young, strong. He will find her pleasing." Abeni's stomach clenched. They were taking her to a powerful chieftain in a distant land, but for what purpose? Was she to be a servant? A gift? A wife? The thought made her sick, and yet she forced herself to remain silent, to keep listening. Hope was not yet lost. Even in her despair, she felt the presence of her ancestors around her. The stories she had grown up hearing, the legends of those who had been taken but found their way back, whispered to her now. She thought of her grandmother who had always told her, "The spirits walk with you, Abeni. Even when you cannot see them, they are there." She would not surrender to hopelessness. With every painful step, she made a vow to herself. She would survive. She would not break. And somehow, someway she would return home. Fate had not abandoned her yet. The night the storm arrived, the heavens roared with fury, as if the gods themselves were angered by the injustice Abeni had suffered. Thunder rumbled across the sky, and rain poured in relentless sheets, drenching the earth and turning the dirt path into thick mud. The traders cursed the weather as they huddled under their makeshift shelters, their torches barely flickering against the howling wind. Abeni sat near the edge of the camp, her hands bound and her body aching from exhaustion. She could see nothing beyond the sheets of rain, but she could feel something shifting in the air. A presence, an unseen force watching over her. The spirits were near. Then from the shadows a figure emerged, a hunched old woman wrapped in dark, rain-soaked cloth. She moved like a whisper, silent and unseen by the men. When she reached Abeni, she bent low and murmured, "Child, do not be afraid." Abeni's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" "I am Mama Nyoka, the woman said, her voice firm but kind. And I have come to set you free. Before Abeni could speak, Mama Nyoka produced a small blade and swiftly cut the ropes binding her wrists. The old woman moved with the precision of someone who had done this before, her hands steady even as the storm raged around them. Come girl, she urged. The ancestors have guided me to you. We must leave before the traders notice. Abeni hesitated only for a moment before nodding. She had no reason to trust this stranger, yet, deep within her, she felt that she must. They slipped into the storm, the sound of the rain masking their movements. The trees swayed violently, their branches like arms reaching out to shield them from sight. The howling wind carried away their footsteps, ensuring that none of the traders would hear their escape. For what felt like hours they ran. Through thickets of trees, across slippery rocks and past hidden ravines, Mama Nyoka led her deeper into the wilderness. Only when they reached the safety of a hollowed-out tree did the old woman allow them to stop. Abeni collapsed onto the ground, her breath ragged. Who are you? She asked at last. Why did you help me? Mama Nyoka smiled, her old eyes gleaming like embers. Because, child, fate is not finished with you yet. She reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, she scattered a handful of white cowrie shells onto the earth, watching them closely as they fell into their natural pattern. Abeni had seen this before. Divination. The elders in her village often read the messages of the spirits through shells, bones, or the flight of birds. Mama Nyoka studied the shells in silence before nodding. Just as I thought, she murmured. You are meant for greatness, Abeni. Your betrayal was not a misfortune, it was a path set by the spirits. Abeni frowned, her heart still aching with the memory of her sister's deception. How can my suffering be part of any plan? Mama Nyoka's expression softened. Because your journey is only beginning. Over the following days, the old woman became Abeni's guide. She taught her how to move unseen in the forest, how to find food in the wild, and how to listen to the whispers of the spirits. She spoke of ancient wisdom, of the ways the universe worked in cycles, and how sometimes, even betrayal could be the seed of something greater. You cannot see it now, child, she said one evening as they sat by the fire. But your pain is shaping you. You are no longer just the girl from Nika. You are becoming something more. Abeni listened, absorbing every word. For the first time since her capture, she did not feel like a victim. She felt strong. And as she gazed into the flames, she finally understood. Fate had not abandoned her. It was guiding her toward something far greater than she had ever imagined. Her transformation had begun. The journey through the mountains was unlike anything Abeni had ever experienced. The air grew thinner, the forest denser, and the winding paths seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. Though her body ached, she pressed on, guided by Mama Nyoka's unwavering steps. 4 days they traveled through hidden trails, crossing streams that shimmered under the moonlight and climbing rocky cliffs that tested their endurance. But with each step, Abeni felt something shifting within her, as if she were being drawn toward something she did not yet understand. Then one morning as they stood atop a high ridge, Abeni saw it. Nestled between the towering peaks was a kingdom unlike any she had ever known. Golden rooftops gleamed under the rising sun, surrounded by thick walls covered in intricate carvings. Waterfalls cascaded down the cliffs, feeding into a vast, glistening river that curled around the settlement like a protective serpent. The air itself carried a sense of mystery, as if the very land breathed with ancient wisdom. Mama Nyoka smiled. We have arrived. As they descended into the valley, Abeni noticed something unusual: the people. They were dressed in fine woven cloths, their skin adorned with sacred markings, their expressions full of both curiosity and quiet sorrow. There was an air of longing among them, as if they had spent years searching for something, or someone. The moment Abeni and Mama Nyoka stepped into the kingdom's heart, whispers spread like wildfire. It is her. She has returned. Could it be? Abeni frowned, glancing at Mama Nyoka, but the old woman remained calm. Before she could ask what was happening, a group of elders approached, a council of wise men and women dressed in elaborate robes, their eyes filled with wonder. The eldest among them, a man with silver-streaked hair and a staff carved with ancient symbols, stepped forward. Child, he said, his voice deep and steady. Where do you come from? Abeni hesitated. I am from the village of Nika, she said. I was taken from my home. The elder nodded as if he already knew. He turned to the others, his face solemn. She fits the description. Murmurs spread through the gathered crowd. Abeni tensed. What description? Why are you looking at me like this? Another elder, An elderly woman with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries, spoke gently. Because, child, we have been waiting for you. Confusion swirled in Abeni's mind. Waiting? For me? The first elder stepped closer. Many years ago, our kingdom suffered a great loss. Our princess, the daughter of our late king, was stolen from us as a baby. We searched far and wide, but she was never found. Since then, we have waited for the day she would return. Abeni's heart pounded. I don't understand. I'm just a girl from Nika. My family. Mama Nyoka placed a hand on her shoulder. Look within, Abeni, she murmured. Have you never felt as though you were meant for something more? She had. Ever since she was a child, there had always been an inexplicable pull toward the unknown, a restlessness she could never explain. But this was impossible. Abeni shook her head. This cannot be true. The elder sighed, then lifted his staff. There is one way to know for certain. Two attendants stepped forward, holding a polished bronze mirror. They gestured for Abeni to remove the cloth covering her shoulder. She hesitated but did as they asked. A collective gasp filled the air. There, on the smooth skin of her shoulder, was a birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon, the sacred mark of the royal bloodline. Abeni stared at it, the truth settling over her like a heavy storm. She was not just a village girl. She was not merely a lost soul. She was the lost princess of this kingdom. And fate had brought her home. The weight of the elder's words hung in the air like a thick mist, suffocating Abeni's thoughts. A princess? A lost heir? It was too much to grasp. She had spent her entire life believing she was just an ordinary girl from Nika, the youngest daughter of a simple family. And yet, here she was, standing before a kingdom that had waited years for her return. Abeni's knees felt weak. She sat down on the woven mat laid out before her in the Grand Council Hall, her fingers tracing the crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. Had her life been a lie? Had the people she called family known the truth all along? Mama Nyoka, who had stood quietly beside her, finally spoke. It is time you learn the truth, child. The elders nodded, and the eldest among them, Chief Odin, began to recount the story. Many seasons ago, when the moon was full and the rivers ran high, a great tragedy befell our kingdom. Our beloved queen gave birth to a daughter, the firstborn in generations to bear the mark of the crescent moon, a sign that she was chosen by the spirits to rule. But on the night of her naming ceremony, a betrayal took place. Abeni leaned forward, her pulse quickening. A group of traitors, envious of the queen's power, conspired to steal the child. They feared what she would become and sought to erase her from destiny itself. On that fateful night, they took the princess and fled into the wilderness, believing they had secured their own future. But fate, as always, had its own plans. The elder woman who had spoken earlier took over. The traitors were pursued, but they disappeared without a trace. We feared the worst, that the child had been lost forever. But deep in our hearts, we always believed she would return. Abeni swallowed hard. But how did I end up in Nika? My family. Chief Odin sighed. The traitors could not keep you. In their desperation, they left you in a faraway village, where fate ensured you would be raised by kind hands. Mama Nyoka added softly, and fate ensured that your sisters, blinded by greed, would unknowingly push you back toward your true destiny. Abeni's breath caught in her throat. Zuba and Kaya. The very ones who had betrayed her, who had sold her for beads, had unknowingly set the wheels of fate in motion. Had they not been driven by their jealousy, Abeni would have remained in Nika, never learning the truth of who she was. Her heart twisted with a mix of emotions. Anger at her sisters. Sorrow for the family she had known. Confusion over the life she had lived. And yet, an undeniable sense of belonging. She looked around the council chamber, at the hopeful faces of the elders, at the people who had never stopped searching for her. These were not strangers. They were her people. Abeni took a deep breath. If I am truly your princess, what does that mean for me now? The elder woman smiled. It means, child, that you have a destiny to fulfill. The word sent a shiver through her spine. A destiny. For so long, Abeni had been tossed between the hands of fate, betrayed, sold, taken against her will. But now, for the first time, she had a choice. She looked at Mama Nyoka, who gave her a reassuring nod. Then, slowly, Abeni stood. She was no longer the lost girl of Nika. She was no longer the helpless captive, nor the abandoned child. She was Abeni, the rightful heir to the mountain kingdom. And she would reclaim what was hers. The sun hung high in the sky as Abeni rode at the head of a grand royal procession. The once-lost princess was no longer a helpless girl but a powerful young queen, adorned in the rich garments of her people. Gold and indigo fabrics wrapped around her, and intricate beads decorated her braided hair, symbols of her newfound status. At her side, warriors in shining armor carried banners bearing the crest of the mountain kingdom. They had been traveling for days, winding through forests and plains, their destination clear: Nika, the village where her life had begun and nearly ended. The moment they entered the village, a hush fell over the people. Farmers dropped their tools. Mothers clutched their children. The elders stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. At the heart of the crowd, two figures cowered in shock: Zuba and Kaya. Her sisters had changed. Their once proud faces were now gaunt, their once fine garments now tattered. Misfortune had followed them, just as fate had intended. Abeni dismounted her horse with regal grace, her footsteps firm as she approached them. The sisters trembled, their eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. But there was none. Kaya fell to her knees first. "Abeni," she whispered. "You're alive?" Zuba, ever the proud one, clenched her fists. "Oh, we thought." Abeni's expression remained unreadable. "You thought you had rid yourselves of me." Her voice was calm, yet it carried the weight of justice. "You sold me for beads, thinking it would be the end of me." Zuba's lips quivered, but she said nothing. Abeni turned to the village, her gaze sweeping over the people who had once adored her, who had once whispered about her kindness. They had not saved her when her sisters betrayed her. They had turned away, allowing the cruel act to happen. And yet, here they were, watching in awe as she returned, not as the abandoned girl but as their queen. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Would she demand vengeance? Would she order their punishment? Abeni turned back to her sisters. "Tell me, Zuba, Kaya, what has life been like for you since that day?" Zuba swallowed hard. "It has been difficult." Kaya sobbed. "After we sold you, misfortune followed us. The beads we received brought no joy, only ruin. Our livestock fell ill. Our harvests failed. The people of Nika shunned us, calling us cursed. No matter what we did, nothing would prosper." Abeni nodded, unsurprised. Fate always finds balance. She could see the fear in their eyes. They expected wrath. They expected exile or worse. Instead, Abeni took a deep breath and spoke. "Fate has already punished you. I do not need to." A murmur ran through the crowd. Zuba looked up, confused. "You will let us go?" Abeni's expression did not soften. "I will not harm you. But I will not forget what you did." She turned to the village. "Let this be a lesson to all who stand here today. Greed, jealousy, and betrayal will bring only ruin. But kindness, even in the face of betrayal, will always lead to something greater." The elders of Nika stepped forward, heads bowed. "Queen Abeni," one of them said, "your wisdom humbles us. We failed you once, but today we witness your greatness." Abeni nodded. She did not need their apologies. The past could not be changed, but the future could be shaped. She turned back to her sisters. "You will remain in this village. You will live among those who know what you did. And you will learn that true wealth does not come from beads or betrayal, but from honor." Zuba and Kaya lowered their heads, knowing they had been given a fate far heavier than exile. As the village watched, Abeni mounted her horse once more. She had no need for revenge. Fate had already done what was needed. And with that, the young queen turned away, riding back toward the kingdom that was now hers, her heart lighter, her spirit stronger. For she had embraced her destiny. And it had made her more powerful than she had ever imagined. The story of Abeni is more than just a tale of betrayal and redemption. It is a testament to the power of fate and the unbreakable spirit of those who choose kindness over cruelty. From the moment she was born, Abeni's destiny had already been written in the stars. No matter how hard others tried to alter her path, whether it was the traders who stole her as a baby or the sisters who sold her for beads, fate always found a way to bring her back to where she truly belonged. This teaches us a vital lesson: fate cannot be escaped. Zuba and Kaya believed that by removing Abeni from their lives, they could secure their own happiness. But their greed and jealousy led to their downfall. Instead of gaining wealth and status, they were cursed with misfortune. Their betrayal did not bring them power, it only exposed their own weaknesses. This is the second lesson: jealousy destroys more than it creates. How often do we see people driven by envy, wishing to take from others instead of building something of their own? Zuba and Kaya thought Abeni's light dimmed their own, but in trying to erase her, they only ensured their own suffering. Jealousy is a fire that consumes those who fuel it. And yet, in the face of such betrayal, Abeni chose a different path. She had every reason to seek revenge. She had suffered, she had been wronged, and fate had placed her in a position where she could have punished those who hurt her. But true strength is not in revenge, it is in justice. Abeni understood that fate had already delivered its punishment. Instead of striking back in anger, she showed wisdom beyond her years. She let her sisters live with the weight of their own actions, a lesson far greater than any punishment she could have given them. Her story also teaches us about resilience and self-belief. Abeni could have given up many times, when she was sold, when she was taken far from home, when she doubted her own identity. But she never let despair consume her. She believed in herself, even when everything seemed lost. And that is perhaps the most powerful lesson of all: trust the journey of life. We do not always understand why certain things happen. Betrayals may shake us, challenges may test us, and fate may take us down roads we never expected. But like Abeni, we must have faith that every step, good or bad, is leading us somewhere greater. Abeni's story is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, destiny is always at work. If we choose kindness, if we remain strong, and if we trust the path ahead, we may find that life has something far greater in store for us than we ever imagined. For fate always finds a way.